When Donald Trump unleashed a fresh trade war against China, many people thought it would simply be a matter of time before Beijing was forced to buckle. After all, they sell nearly $600 billion worth of goods to the US every year and depend on America for 15% of all of their exports. On the surface, it seemed obvious that they couldn't survive without their biggest customer. But what they did next shocked the world. Instead of flinching, they fired back fast, matching tariffs, cutting off key exports, and sending a clear message: we don't care. But something doesn't make sense. How can a country seemingly so dependent on selling its goods survive, let alone fight back, when its biggest customer walks away? Well, behind the scenes, something has changed. Over the past decade, China has secretly been rebuilding the very foundations of its economy. Instead of just spending, they're investing. A staggering 40% of their annual GDP is poured into investments every year, almost double that of any other major economy. And the results are impossible to ignore. Chinese firms are rising to replace US companies at the top of the food chain. BYD has overtaken Tesla as the biggest EV manufacturer. TikTok has become one of the biggest and fastest-growing social media platforms in the world. And Chinese brands everywhere are quickly moving up the value chain. China isn't just trying to survive without the US. It's showing the world that it can lead without it. So, has China actually made itself economically indestructible? Or is this all just smoke and mirrors? You've probably seen the conflicting headlines. China's property market is collapsing. The economy is crumbling under an aging population. Millions of young people are unemployed. And yet, megafactories are being built daily. High-speed rail now connects the entire country, and some of the most advanced technology on Earth no longer comes from the West. So which China is real? The truth is, both. The West is caught between these two conflicting realities, struggling to understand the new China. Because the story we've told ourselves for decades is starting to fall apart. Ever since China opened up to trade in the 1970s, its economic rise has been fueled by the West. Its massive population came with low wages, and China took full advantage of it to become the world's manufacturing hub. They built factories for Apple, powered Amazon's supply chain, and attracted billions in Western investment. From the 1990s through the 2000s, China's economy grew at an astonishing pace, averaging nearly 10% annual GDP growth for years. The model was simple: China made and America bought. It was fast, cheap, and efficient, but also deeply dependent. By 2010, China had become the world's second-largest economy. And its factories weren't just cheap anymore. They were also getting smarter. In places like Shenzhen, the same assembly lines that once churned out knockoffs had slowly learned from their experience, now producing cutting-edge technology at a fraction of the cost of America. Meanwhile, the US kept importing more and more. By 2018, China's trade surplus with the US had ballooned to over $400 billion. Concerns over economic dependency were starting to grow. The idea that a rising authoritarian power could hold this much control over global supply chains became a threat too big to ignore. To make matters worse, from 2001 to 2017, the US lost over 3 million manufacturing jobs, many of them outsourced to China. Gradually, the media and politicians began to point fingers. Chinese firms were accused of playing dirty, receiving government subsidies to make their goods cheaper, and being protected by anti-competition laws. The idea of confronting China was gaining momentum. And when Donald Trump ran for president in 2016 on a promise to take on China's trade practices, he won. Almost immediately after taking office, he kept his promise, slapping tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods. The logic was simple: raise the costs of importing from China and push American companies to bring production back home. But that wasn't enough. The US also moved to protect its technological lead. They blacklisted Huawei, barred American companies from selling it critical chips, and restricted China's access to advanced semiconductors. This wasn't just about trade anymore. It was about strategic dominance. From 2018 to 2020, the tension just escalated. Then it simmered under President Biden. He didn't aggressively increase the tariffs like Trump, but he didn't reduce them either. The direction was clear. The decoupling had begun. And by 2025, under a second Trump presidency, the conflict came roaring back. A fresh wave of tariffs was announced, targeting Chinese EVs, solar equipment, and batteries, with some tariffs reaching 100%. The message was clear: we're done with being dependent. But this time, something was different. The first time around, China was cautious. It negotiated and tried to de-escalate. But now, China fired back immediately, matching tariffs, banning rare earth exports, and blacklisting American firms. This wasn't the China of 2016. This was a new China, bolder, more self-assured, and ready to fight. To many in the West, it was a wake-up call. Had China quietly built an economy that no longer needed the US? Beijing knows exactly what the rest of the world suspects, that a giant built on exports can't survive if the world stops buying. So, over the past decade, China has been quietly trying to rewire its entire economy, from a machine fueled by American demand into a system that can run on its own. At the heart of this transformation is a concept introduced by Xi Jinping, a strategy known as dual circulation. This is the blueprint for an entirely new kind of Chinese economy, one designed to be resilient, self-sustaining, and far less exposed to the West. Here's how it works. The first engine, internal circulation, focuses on strengthening domestic demand. It's about turning China's 1.4 billion citizens into the main driver of its own growth. Despite the age-old image of China as an export-driven powerhouse, the numbers tell a different story. In 2024, domestic consumption actually made up 45% of China's GDP, more than double that of exports. Chinese people are buying home-produced cars, electronics, and even luxury brands. But here's the catch. This level of consumption is still very weak compared to other major economies, where households regularly spend 60% to 70% of GDP. Why? Because despite being a socialist country, China's social safety nets are almost non-existent. It spends less than 1% of its GDP on programs like unemployment benefits and pension support, one of the lowest levels in the world. Add in a housing market in crisis, with property values falling and a shrinking birth rate, and you get a population that feels immense pressure to save for healthcare, retirement, and education. So while domestic consumption is growing, it hasn't taken over the economy just yet. That's the whole point of the dual circulation model. Not to end trade with the world, but to survive without being dependent on it. This brings us to the second engine, external circulation. This keeps global trade alive, but with a twist. Instead of relying heavily on the US and Europe, China is forging new trade routes and diversifying its partners across the global south. In 2000, America bought over 20% of China's exports. By 2023, that number had dropped to only 15%, but China's global export share kept rising. It hasn't changed how much it's exporting, but rather who those goods are going to. How did they do it? They built railways through the mountains of Laos, ports in Sri Lanka, and highways in Kenya. This is the Belt and Road Initiative, an ambitious strategy launched in 2013 to connect China to the world. Since its launch, China has spent over $1 trillion on this mega project. The West mocked it as too ambitious, too expensive. But a decade later, the results are hard to ignore. Over 140 countries have joined, representing nearly 75% of the world's population. The group of Southeast Asian nations, ASEAN, has now overtaken the US to become China's largest trading partner. The US is still a significant market, but China now has a diverse and growing network of new partners. It's no longer just a factory for the West. It's become a hub for new global trade. But China knows it can't just rely on consumers and trade alone. To truly become a superpower, it must build a powerful engine underneath it all, one fueled by massive investment, cutting-edge technology, and rock-solid infrastructure. Visual, sleek, futuristic shots of semiconductor manufacturing, R&D labs, and scientists at work. Since 2018, China has poured more than $500 billion into research and development. When the US slapped export bans on key chips and targeted Huawei, many assumed China's tech ambitions would be crushed. But instead, Huawei shocked the world in 2023 by unveiling a homegrown 7-nanometer chip, a breakthrough only possible because of massive state investment. On the EV front, BYD has overtaken Tesla as the world's largest electric car maker. China's high-speed rail network is longer than the rest of the world's combined. They now produce roughly 1 in 3 of all manufactured goods in the entire world. In many industries, China is making far more than what the market needs. More steel than it can use, more solar panels than it can install. To the West, this looks like a flaw, an overcapacity problem. But to China, overcapacity isn't a flaw. It's a weapon. By flooding the world with affordable goods, China embeds itself into crucial global supply chains. Europe needs Chinese solar panels for its green transition. American EVs need Chinese batteries to run. The more that China makes, the more the world depends on it. And the harder it becomes to say no to China. However, this state-led capitalism comes with a cost. To keep the engine running, China has leaned heavily on borrowed money. Its public debt is projected to pass 100% of its GDP by 2026, signaling a risk that it's fueling growth faster than it can absorb it. We've seen this before. Ghost cities, idle factories, high-speed rail lines with too few passengers. If China keeps building more than the economy can realistically use, all of this investment could end up sitting idle. The US-China relationship is no longer what it used to be. The days of quiet interdependence, where China made and America bought, are over. In some ways, China no longer needs the US like it once did. It's built new factories, new trade routes, and new alliances. It's pouring trillions into its own technology and feeding its own consumer market. It is building an economic machine designed to weather whatever storms may come. But that doesn't mean it's untouchable. China hasn't fully replaced the West. Its consumers don't spend like Americans. Its chip industry still lags behind in the most advanced nodes. And its economy still bears the scars of a property crisis, sluggish demand, and mounting debt. What China isn't doing is retreating. It's rebuilding. Quietly and steadily, it's crafting a parallel economic system, one less exposed to US pressure and more embedded across the global South. This isn't just about trade wars or sanctions anymore. It's about whether the US can still call the shots in a world where China no longer plays by its rules. The age of American globalization is fading. And the question isn't if China will survive, it's how the rest of the world will adapt.